back, y'all, to another reaction video. So we're gonna watch this video that is titled "More Awesome Pro Wrestler Heel Turns." So I've never heard of that term before, heel turns before, and I literally had to look it up to understand what that term means. And it basically means like a wrestler who was once considered a villain has kind of like turned into a hero or something like that. And the other day I did a reaction on Patreon. I watched the Brock Lesnar versus The Rock match or whatever, and I noticed that in the crowd they were kind of booing The Rock. And in that video I mentioned that I remember there was one point in time where The Rock was like a villain or something, or like everybody did not like The Rock, and I never really understood like why, because from my memory, because I remember watching, he used to be booed. And from what I remember, I thought at one point everybody liked The Rock, and then all of a sudden nobody liked him. So I was like, did I miss something during like a pay-per-view match, or maybe I missed the show? But I do remember there was a point where people were booing The Rock, and I was confused, and I really never understood why or what happened. But in this video, I do see that The Rock is on the thumbnail, so I'm hoping that I would get an understanding, because I never taken the time to figure out like why The Rock was being booed. And then I mentioned too that I also remember a time where he was trying to win back the crowd, but it did not work or something like that. It's like really, really deep in my in my memory when I was little and I was watching. I was like, what is going on? Like, why is The Rock being booed? What did he do? But yeah, we're gonna watch this video. Hopefully it does get mentioned and I get a well understanding of what happened. And yeah, I finally know what that term means, because I never heard of that term before. But we're gonna get into this video, so let's watch.
Hey everyone, you guys seem to really enjoy the heel turn video I put together a few weeks back, and you all jumped in the comments to let me know your favourite heel turns along with some of your favourite babyface turns. Today I'm going to take a look at more good guys turning bad, and I'm only including turns that you guys mentioned in the comments. There's some fantastic moments talked about in that comment section, and there's enough to make this a series, to be honest, but I picked out a bunch that I too thought were executed really well. So if you're a fan of heroes turning to the dark side, and if you like to see folks breaking bad, then hopefully you'll enjoy this video filled with more pro wrestling heel turns.
You think that you are better than me,
The Undertaker.
don't you?
You don't kick ass for 3 decades without changing things up every now and then, and The Undertaker's a guy who definitely changed things up. His American Badass character, though, seems to be a little polarizing from the comments I usually get on my channel, but I like Biker Taker quite a bit, and I thought the character fit into the programming the WWF wanted to produce at the time. 2 Taker turns spring to mind for me. The one that led to the creation of the Ministry when the Dead Man became the Lord of Darkness, and then there's the one that you guys talked about in the comments in the last heel turn video, the 2001 turn that happened on Raw towards the end of the year. Kurt Angle and Vince McMahon tried to get Jim Ross to join the illustrious Mr. McMahon Kiss My Ass Club when Steve Austin refused to do so, and of course Jim Ross wasn't very keen. The Undertaker arrived on the scene and we all thought the American Badass was going to save Ross, but it didn't quite work out that way. Undertaker said he's seen a lot of people leave the WWF: Hogan, Savage, Warrior, Piper, Bret and Shawn. All these men kiss McMahon's ass in one way or another, but the one man who kissed McMahon's ass the most was the Undertaker himself. 11 years the Undertaker's had to put up with McMahon's crap, so Undertaker wanted to know if Jim Ross was about to kiss Vince's ass, and did Ross want to kiss McMahon's ass? Jim Ross says hell no, and Taker then wanted to know if that's because Jim Ross thinks he's better than the Undertaker. Ross then takes a punch to the face, and the Undertaker had officially turned heel. Taker tells Ross he isn't better than the Dead Man before promising that he's gonna kiss Vince's rear end tonight, and Taker says it won't happen until Vince McMahon's wearing Jim Ross's cowboy hat. The deed is done. Ross gets some ass cheek on the lips, and The Undertaker once again was a bad guy in WWF. They pulled this one off well because it was unexpected, and using Jim Ross here, who the fans absolutely loved, was a genius move also.
You're not like me anymore. You're washed up. You're washed up and you're through.
You gotta keep in mind for this one that back in this era, you usually came into a territory as a heel or a babyface, and that's how you stayed. Your character was pretty much already established, and deviations were very uncommon. This heel turn would really set the bar for years to come. It was the blueprint for others to follow, and it resonates with a lot of people still to this day because of how impactful it was. Bruno's student Larry Zbyszko debuted in 1973 as a babyface, and in 1974 he was voted Rookie of the Year by PWI. His career was fast-tracked thanks to his association with the living legend, but as the years went on, he always felt he was living in Bruno's shadow. He was always Bruno's kid. In late 1979, Bruno transitioned into an announcer role, but WWF business was down, and a Sammartino comeback could potentially fare well if handled correctly, so a student versus teacher storyline was cooked up that would feature Zbyszko and Sammartino. Larry wouldn't answer some of Bruno's questions when Bruno was just trying to do his job as an announcer and an interviewer, and Zbyszko would eventually admit that he was getting a little fed up of being known as only Bruno's student. The only way Larry could get out of Bruno's shadow was if he beat him in the middle of the ring, and so a challenge was laid out. Bruno refused. He didn't want to hurt their friendship, but when Zbyszko said he was going to retire, Bruno relented and he agreed to have the match on one stipulation. Bruno would only wrestle defensively and he wasn't going to go into the match to hurt his friend. Well, the match did indeed take place, and Larry Zbyszko absolutely destroyed Bruno with a wooden chair, leaving Sammartino a bloody and beaten up mess. Fans were absolutely livid. Chair shots weren't as common as what they are now, and viewers at home were warned during replays that the match wasn't suitable for those with a weak stomach or those who had children in the room. And all this created a lot of buzz that in turn made Larry Zbyszko the most hated man in all of pro wrestling. As the feud raged on, Bruno would say he created Frankenstein's monster, while Larry would call himself the real living legend. Said he sold out to see Sammartino get his revenge on Zbyszko, but there was never a clear winner. It all led to the famous showdown in Shea Stadium where Bruno Sammartino defeated Zbyszko by stepping out of a steel cage. Groundbreaking, trend-setting, and proving there's big business to be had when emotion gets injected into wrestling angles. Larry Zbyszko's heel turn could very well be the most important turn of all time.
I think I'm tired of my best friend stabbing me in the back.
Not many people bring this one up, but upon watching it again, it was actually pulled off really well. It makes you feel a little uncomfortable while also adding some good old shock value. At WWE Bragging Rights 2009, a Fatal 4-Way World Title match was booked featuring champion The Undertaker, CM Punk, Rey Mysterio, and Batista. Batista had the match won, but the pin was broken up by Rey Mysterio, and keep in mind, Mysterio and Batista were good friends leading up to this. Also, keep in mind though that the world title's on the line, so friendship and sportsmanship can kinda get tossed out the window until the final bell. So Rey breaking up the pin shouldn't have been that big of a deal. Undertaker ended up pinning Batista. Batista was upset, but it appeared that he and Rey patched things up after the bout during a post-match interview, and this is when things get good. Batista takes the mic, he puts his arm around Rey, and he says he's tired of getting so close to winning the belt, and he's tired of his friends stabbing him in the back. Rey says it's not like that, but Batista keeps a hand on Rey's back, and he asks him, "Do you think I'm playing?" There's no physicality yet, you can sense it's coming, and you can sense that Mysterio's in a lot of trouble, but it's built up really slowly. Batista says he's not playing, and he laughs and he smiles when he says, "I'm gonna rip your head off." And just when Batista drops the mic, his whole demeanor changes. He hits a big clothesline before kicking Rey out of the ring, and on the outside he chokes Mysterio while shouting, "You were supposed to be my friend." Rey calls Batista by his first name and he pleads for Batista to let go. He says, "Dave, you're hurting me," and for a moment we think Batista's gonna come to his senses, but he instead throws Mysterio into the barrier. Batista then goes to walk away, but he runs back and he lands a kick to Mysterio's head, and then he walks back up the ramp. I know Batista gets a lot of flack, and I also know a lot of it's unwarranted, but this, I thought, was some of his best work. Big Batista's had one of the best face turns and one of the best heel turns in pro wrestling history. On the next episode of SmackDown, Ray wanted to straighten things out and he asked Dave, what about Eddie Guerrero? What about the guy who both Ray and Batista were good friends with? And Batista solidified his heel turn by saying, Eddie is dead. He's not thinking about Eddie, he's thinking about himself.
This time, it's the Andersons and Ric Flair. Look at Ric, what he does to Dusty.
Facts. I had a dream last night about Batista.
In early 1985, Flair was a tweener in core markets such as the
swear
Carolinas and Virginia, but on TBS TV, he was still a heel. The heel turn was completely solidified in all areas, though, on the 29th of December 1985, when Flair, the NWA champion at the time, battled Nikita Koloff inside a steel cage in the Omni Coliseum. Flair won the match, but a beatdown from Nikita and Ivan Koloff followed, and this led to Dusty Rhodes rushing down to make the save. Dusty helps the Nature Boy, but then Arn and Ole Anderson head to the ring, and fans are left shocked when Flair and the Andersons not only attack Dusty, but they absolutely destroy him. Dusty gets annihilated, and a riot almost breaks out in the Omni as fans try to climb the cage. It's the kind of feat that must have scared the crap out of the guys in the ring, because to the fans in the Omni in Atlanta, this was very real. Shortly afterwards, the Andersons would also help out Tully Blanchard in a match against Sam Houston, and the Andersons, Flair and Blanchard, along with Blanchard's manager J.J. Dillon, would confirm their alliance and call themselves the Four Horsemen, one of the greatest heel stables to ever step inside the ring. Before that happened though, the attack on Dusty led to a match at Starrcade 1985 between the Nature Boy and the American Dream. Dusty managed to beat Flair for the title, but after the event, Tommy Young ruled the match as a DQ victory and the belt went back to Slick Rick.
I don't give a damn what anybody thinks of me.
I think the actual setup and the pieces that were put in place for this heel turn was what made it so good, and the execution of this one resulted in what I believe to be one of the best finishes to a WWF title match that the company ever produced. At SummerSlam 1997, Bret Hart was getting a title shot against The Undertaker, and Bret said if he lost this upcoming match, then he wouldn't wrestle again in the United States. Weeks later, when Raw went to Canada, Shawn Michaels announced that he was going to referee the Bret vs. Taker match, but there would be a big stipulation. If HBK interfered and helped The Undertaker in any way at all, then HBK would also not be allowed to wrestle in the United States. So the only thing Shawn could really do was call it right down the middle and hope that his arch nemesis would come up short after a fair match. The thing is though, this is Shawn Michaels, and even Jerry Lawler said on commentary at SummerSlam that somehow, some way, Shawn's going to end up being the center of attention because he just can't help himself. Bret used a chair during the match and he quickly threw it away while Shawn wasn't looking. HBK noticed the chair and he confronts the Hitman. Bret says it's got nothing to do with him and Shawn needs to back off, but HBK won't let it go and he pulls Bret back to continue their conversation. The Hitman ends up spitting on Shawn and Shawn swings the chair. Bret ducks out of the way and The Undertaker takes all the impact. HBK now had to make a decision really fast. Does he count the pin so he can continue to wrestle in the United States, or does he give it all up and refuse to count Taker's shoulders to the mat? Well, HBK decided his career was more important and he counted the pinfall. Bret became WWF champion and the fans were irate. The next night on Raw, Shawn said all this wasn't his fault. He blamed WWF and he blamed Vince McMahon. Shawn pretty much said the company and the fans should have been fully aware that putting a guy like HBK in a referee spot was only going to lead to problems. The fans were dumping this all on Shawn's lap when really it's the fans' problem for expecting less of the Heartbreak Kid. Shawn pretty much said he didn't care. If he was going to go down and take the hit for this one, he was going to drag everyone in WWF down with him, and he doesn't care what anyone thinks of him anymore. A rivalry between Taker and HBK would then develop, and this would bring about the genesis of D-Generation X. We heard stories of Shawn being a cocky asshole backstage during this time period, but now he was allowed to be that asshole on TV. This heel Shawn Michaels was much different from the old boy toy from the early 90s.
Because Hulk Hogan, I have earned respect. I deserve respect.
Roddy Piper blamed Paul Orndorff for their loss at WrestleMania 1, and Mr. Wonderful was attacked by Piper on the first ever Saturday night's main event. Later that same evening, Orndorff ran to the ring to help Hulk Hogan when the Hulkster got double teamed by Piper and Bob Orton. Orndorff would become a babyface who would ditch Bobby Heenan as his manager in favour of tagging up with Hulk Hogan and facing Piper and Orndorff in tag matches all across the United States. Orndorff would also compete in singles matches with Piper and Orton. Bobby Heenan would place a bounty on Mr. Wonderful's head, and fans really bought into the babyface Mr. Wonderful as he fought the good fight during 1985 and 1986. Things got a little shaky though when Hulk Hogan was too busy to take a phone call from Paul, and Paul thought this was a sign of disrespect. Adrian Adonis was also stirring the pot by calling Paul Hulk Jr. and telling Orndorff that he's nothing but Hulk Hogan's lackey. He's playing second fiddle to the real superstar of WWF. Paul wanted to prove that he was just as good as Hulk Hogan. He and Hogan battled the Moondogs, and Orndorff got the win by wrestling most of the match by himself, and then the heel turn was solidified when he and Hogan teamed up to take on Big John Studd and King Kong Bundy. Hogan and Mr. Wonderful collided into each other and Paul fell off the apron. Studd and Bundy then double teamed the Hulkster, but Paul didn't help. He was selling his eye after the collision. Eventually though, Paul did get in the ring to help out Hogan. Fans in the arena thought everything was okay and all's well that ends well, but Orndorff then hit Hogan with a clothesline and a piledriver to solidify his place as a heel once again, and fans weren't happy at all. Bobby Heenan came back to manage Mr. Wonderful. Paul started using Real American as his own entrance theme, and Paul and Hogan would then face each other in matches all across America that would draw a lot of money. It would all culminate in matches at the big event on pay-per-view and a steel cage match at the 9th Saturday night's main event show. Hogan won the big event match via disqualification, and after some bullshittery and a match restart, Hulk Hogan won the cage match at Saturday night's main event. This heel turn though shook a lot of younger viewers at the time, and it also introduced a lot of younger viewers to what a heel turn was. The Orndorff vs Hogan rivalry also done big numbers for WWF. Those of you who join me for Reliving the War every week would know that this one still hits me pretty hard because I couldn't get enough of the Steiner brothers, but it was still a good heel turn. The Steiner brothers breaking up at one point seemed impossible. Brothers Rick and Scott were as thick as thieves, and they were also incredibly successful and incredibly popular. Times were changing though in 1998, and while Scott did turn heel briefly in 1998, it's the turn at Super Brawl 8 that left everybody stunned, although we also should have seen this one coming. Scott was getting a little cocky during Steiner tag team matches on Nitro. Sometimes he would completely refuse to tag his brother in and he would win matches all by himself, but Rick and manager Ted DiBiase would let Scott know that he was out of line and he needs to start being a team player. Scott would also get distracted a few times when competing in pose downs with Buff Bagwell before, during and after matches, and the commentators speculated that these little pose downs seemed to be more friendly than competitive. Anyway, it appears that the Steiner brothers were back on track after winning the WCW World Tag Team Championships on Nitro. The next stop for Rick and Scott was WCW Super Brawl 8, where the brothers would face former champions Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. During the match, while the Steiners were performing their usual pose after clearing out the ring, Scott began attacking Rick and the commentators couldn't believe what they were seeing. Some fans popped, others were stunned, but Scott had done the unthinkable by turning his back on brother Rick, and Scott would go on to pretty much hand the Outsiders the tag team championships. Scott Steiner joined the New World Order. He debuted a new look the very next night on Monday Nitro. In his early days in the faction saw him team up with a new partner, Buff Bagwell. Scott's new look and attitude would eventually elevate him to the top of the cards during WCW's darkest days, but Big Papa Pump proved to be successful, and it all started at Super Brawl 8 when the Steiner brothers broke up in the middle of the ring.
Die, Rocky, die. That's the gratitude I get from you pieces of crap.
I included Rock's heel turn at Survivor Series 98 in the previous video, but many of you thought that The Rock joining the Nation in 1997 meant a whole lot more, and indeed, on the grand scheme of things, you're absolutely right. Rock debuted in WWF during a very interesting time in the company. Fans were starting to favour the bad guys, and the white meat babyface was definitely going out of fashion. Rock made his debut at Survivor Series 1996, and on the very same night, the fans cheered for the heel Psycho Sid during his main event match with Shawn Michaels. So this gives us an example of where the company was headed, whether the WWF liked it or not. The NWO played a big part in this too over on TNT, but a guy like Rocky Maivia coming in all smiles and trying his very best to win matches and accepting losses because the better man won just wasn't gonna cut it. The WWF also pushed Rocky quite a lot in late 1996 and early 1997, and it didn't take long for people to get sick of him within the span of a few months. Even The Rock said himself that things weren't looking too good for his future, and he was at risk of becoming another guy who comes into a lot of fanfare, but then he just kinda fizzles out again. Rocky Maivia got put on the shelf when he wrestled a match against Mankind, and a bad knee injury would keep him out of action for a few months. When he came back though, he helped out Farouk, the leader of the villainous Nation of Domination, and Rock would turn heel and join the group. This one is very significant because not only did The Rock need to change things up in order to stick around WWF, but Rock was able to be himself a whole lot more as a heel. Turns out Rock's a pretty funny guy when he gets going, and over time fans would come to appreciate the Great One, but it took a heel turn for this side of The Rock to come out. After addressing the fans the next week on Raw and showing his displeasure at fans chanting "Die Rocky Die" during his matches, The Rock was able to get a lot of hate as part of the Nation. Fans would chant "Rocky sucks" when the whole nation stood in the ring, and only in the world of wrestling could this be considered a good thing. Fans were paying attention to Rocky much more than the other heels in the faction, and this didn't go unnoticed. Rock would eventually take over the leadership role in the Nation of Domination while forcing Farouk out with a beatdown. Rock would then just become a bigger star after each passing week. The shock value of the 1998 Survivor Series turn was great, but when you talk about a heel turn that seriously helped a wrestler get to the next level, Rock joining the Nation ranks up there as one of the most significant.
But I got where I am today on my own. I have come into my own.
Barry Windham was always known as a great performer, but one that could never reach the next level. There's plenty of other guys like this in pro wrestling, and it's a sticking point for many fans in the modern era. There's so many talented guys and girls out there right now, but very little get a big break. Well, Barry Windham was also in that category. Everyone knew he was one of the best, but big opportunities were few and far between. That all changed when Barry Windham turned heel though, and while Barry would still play second fiddle to other bigger stars such as Ric Flair, the heel turn did wonders for Barry's career, and the shock of Windham turning heel left a lasting impression on many NWA fans. Lex Luger was a short-lived member of the Four Horsemen. J.J. Dillon ordered Luger to eliminate himself from the Bunkhouse Stampede Battle Royal in 1988, but the total package refused. So Luger left the Elite faction and he found himself a new tag team partner in Barry Windham. The sneaky J.J. Dillon would try to recruit Barry Windham into the Four Horsemen, and this made Windham wary of Lex Luger's intentions. Barry thought this was all a plot to get him to join the faction, but the team carried on. Their tag team title win at the first Clash of the Champions is something you need to watch just to see the insane crowd reaction. This just proves how popular the team of Luger and Windham really was. Barry and Lex were booked in a tag title defense against former champions Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard. Luger got messed up when Tully threw him into a ring post, and this would lead to Luger not being there when Barry needed a tag. J.J. Dillon took this opportunity to further enforce that Luger was no good and Windham needed to join the Horsemen, and that's exactly what happened. Barry Windham power slammed Luger back in the ring, he let Arn Anderson pin his own partner, and Barry made it clear he was not a Horseman when he left the ring with J.J., Tully and Anderson. A lot of hearts were broken that night, but this would become a career-defining moment for Barry Windham. Windham would end up winning the US title, and he legitimately helped the Four Horsemen become even more elite. Many people think the iteration of the Horsemen that included Barry Windham was the absolute best version of the group that ever existed. The turn was unexpected. It paid off big time in terms of getting people talking and helping Barry Windham add more layers to his character. If you can legitimately piss fans off or make them really upset with a heel turn, then in my opinion, it worked. And that was a few more heel turns from the history of pro wrestling that you mentioned in the previous video. Thank you for your comments and keep them going in this video, and we'll see about putting out a part 3. I have another face turn video planned for the future too, because again you guys threw in a ton of suggestions and there's a few I can't believe I missed in the first video, so keep the comments coming in.
Okay, so it's nice to know that he mentioned what he mentioned about The Rock, but that was before my time. The oh my god, the situation I remember was different. What he brought up in this video, this was before I started watching. So yeah, I'm just gonna have to find it on my own to find out what happened, because it's like I remember vividly in my memory, like something happened where everybody just did not like him. So yeah, I don't know, but I didn't know that. I didn't know that but you know what though? It just sounds like he benefited from you know what I'm saying, this heel turn that he mentioned, but this is not what I was talking about. But that's gonna do it for this reaction, y'all. Leave some comments down below. Leave some comments and I will see you guys later.